Hello and welcome back. Today we celebrate the fourth Sunday of Lent. As I mentioned last week, in our parish in Bellingen we're celebrating the Mass of the Second Scrutiny for our catechumens. So again, I'd ask you to please keep our catechumens in your prayers as they enter the final weeks of their preparation before they're baptised and received into the church this Easter Vigil. The readings today really revolve around the theme of the light and the dark. And for us who live in urban environments, city environments, sometimes we don't really get a sense of the power of the image of darkness in the scriptures, because at night time we have street lights, our houses are lit up like Christmas trees. So it's kind of rare that we experience the really profound darkness that would have been fairly common for people in Jesus' time. At night time, particularly when there was no moon, the dark could be very, very dark indeed. And so it became a symbol. The light becomes a symbol of where God works. And so in the scriptures, we're often called the children of light because we are the children of God. And so our behaviour and our actions are transparent. They're out there for everybody to see because it's in the light. And so the light becomes a symbol of virtue and liberation and freedom. Darkness, on the other hand, is a time of danger, because in the darkness, that's the time when criminal acts occur, when murders occur, when deeds of sin occur, because they're under the cover of darkness. People don't see them. And so in Jesus' time, to go out into the dark at night was a dangerous thing often, and also very limiting. So darkness limits us. That's the whole point of the different, the comparison between light and dark. And so the dark is the realm of Satan, as opposed to the light, which is the realm of God. In Sydney, where I grew up, just over the mountains to the west, there's a place called Jenolan Caves. And I've been there a few times when I was younger. And one of the things they like to do when they take you through these, massive caves in the mountains there, is they get you into the cave, and when you're well and truly in there, they turn off all the lights that have been set up so that you can see all of the stalactites and stalagmites and all of the marbles that are in the caves. And that's the closest thing, I think, that experience is the closest thing I've ever had to really what this symbol of darkness in the scriptures is talking about. When they turn off those lights in the cave, you can put your hand up in front of your face, that close to your face, and you literally can't see it. You cannot see a thing. It's the blackest black I've ever experienced. And so you're kind of paralyzed. You can't move because you can't see where you're going, and you could put your foot, over a cliff inside the cave. So this kind of darkness is a darkness that paralyzes us. Today in the Gospel, that darkness is equated too with blindness. And in the first reading from the first book of Samuel, where God is choosing through Samuel the new king of Israel, David. And we see that in that reading we're reminded that the Lord, God, he sees reality as it is. We don't. We tend to get blinded by superficial appearances. So to the eyes of Samuel, for instance, all of David's older brothers that came forward, to him, there were those there that would appear to be the one that God would want for king. But instead it's the youngest one, the least assuming one. So again, that reading reminds us that sometimes we get blinded to reality simply because we can't see the whole, but also because we tend to look at things superficially, or we become familiar with situations or people and we think we know them better than we actually do. So we become blinded. In the letter, Paul's letter to the Ephesians, he is talking about this idea of darkness, blindness as the realm of evil, that darkness enslaves and diminishes life, and it leads to death. The light is the realm of God, the realm of life. And so to be free is to begin to see as God sees, not as humans see. To be free is to do the works of goodness, to be a person of right living and truth. And this is what the children of light, who we're meant to be through our baptism, this is how they live, this is what they do. And so when we get to the Gospel of John and we get to this beautiful, profound story of the man born blind, we have this great theme of light and dark, seeing and blindness coming through. And so this man who's been born blind, he's never known anything else. So he's never known what it's like to see. So in one sense, he probably doesn't know what he's missing. We can be like that a bit too. If we haven't come to know Christ too well yet, then perhaps we don't know what we're missing. We don't know what we can see better. I can remember years ago, I wear glasses, but I didn't start wearing glasses till I was about 20 years old. And I'll never forget the first time walking out of the optometrist with these glasses on. And I knew that I was a bit short-sighted, but it was much more than that. I remember walking out of the optometrist with these new glasses on, and I was almost overwhelmed by the richness of colours. I was seeing things, even just an ordinary shopping mall, I was seeing things in a way that I hadn't seen for a long time, and so I'd forgotten what they look like. And so it was quite an experience of this, the sharpness, the detail, and the vibrancy of colour, which I had forgotten about. And so I didn't really miss it until I put those glasses on and realised what I'd been missing. And so we too can become spiritually blind, and we don't know what we're missing, because perhaps we've never seen it, or it's been a long time since we've had that kind of relationship with God. And so in this reading, this gospel today, we see that Jesus gives healing of the physical blindness of this man that's been born blind, but that's really not the point of the story, because as the story goes on, he journeys from not only being healed of his physical blindness, but he's also healed of his spiritual blindness. He comes gradually to know who this Jesus really is. And so Jesus has opened the eyes of his heart, of his spirit, to be able to know the presence of God in his life. Part of the story reminds us again that disability and illness is not a punishment from God. So that question that's asked, who sinned, this man or his parents, for him to be born blind, it's not the way God works. Disability and illness are not punishments. However, they are symbols. They're symbols of how spiritual illness, in other words, sin, debilitates us. Sin, spiritual illness, enslaves us so that we're not fully human. We're not living our potential. Spiritual illness, sin, eventually leads to eternal death if it's not treated with the healing grace of Christ, who comes to give us real sight, the ability to recognize him, to follow him. So as I just said a minute ago, physical illness and disability is not punishment. It's not a punishment from God. And in fact, our own physical illness, our own disabilities, if they're things that can't be cured by medical science, or if we have other sufferings that, we simply have to deal with and live with, then they can actually become redemptive, which is something that, unless we understand and have a relationship with Christ, can sound crazy. But in fact, our sufferings, whether through illness or disability, can become something redemptive if we unite them with Christ, with his sufferings. St. Paul talks about this, that we are invited as human beings to make up for what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ through our own sufferings, to make them redemptive. In other words, to offer them to the Lord as, if you like, the ability to intercede for others. And in that too, we have to notice that the providence of God is something that's always present in our lives, even if it's not always apparent, even if we're not always aware of it. The providence of God is always there. And so that Jesus responds to those who ask him the question about this blind man, who sinned? And he says, no one sinned. Rather, the man was born blind because of God's providence, in order to become an instrument that reveals who Christ is to the world. So we need, again, we're invited by Christ in this gospel story to trust in the providence of God in our lives, no matter what comes, to trust in his providence, to trust that he is there with us always, even if that's not always apparent, as it was in the case of this blind man. We don't know how old he was, but he's a man, so he's been living for, at least 2 decades, maybe 3 or 4. And has been blind the whole time. And yet now his blindness has become a moment of grace, a moment in which the redemptive power and the revelation of Christ is made apparent. It's become a grace for him because he's been given by Christ spiritual sight, while the Pharisees, who think they can see, have become even more spiritually blind because they are closed to the reality of Jesus. They are arrogant. They are self-satisfied. They think they have it all. And so they've become blind to the presence of Christ in their lives. They've become spiritually sick. And this is the irony of the story, that the outsider, the one who has been looked down upon because he's blind and therefore he must have sinned in some way, he is in fact the one who begins to truly see. It's interesting too that Jesus sends him to the Pool of Siloam to wash after he daubs his eyes with the mud. And it's not the Pool of Siloam that heals him, but there's an interesting symbolism going on there, because Siloam means sent. And Jesus is the one who is par excellence sent to us. He has been sent to save us. And he brings us living water. So it's not the Pool of Siloam that heals, it's the living water that Jesus brings us, the waters of baptism. Again, there's an echo here of what went on last week in the story of the Samaritan woman at the well, the living water. So this man who has never known sight now sees better than anyone. And what does he do? As he's interrogated, he witnesses. He witnesses to Jesus. He speaks the truth to the Pharisees, who, because of their blindness, try to avoid the truth at all costs. And this is a powerful reminder to us of some of the dynamics that go on in all human beings, because we are by nature fallen. And so we sometimes, even though we long for the truth, we often resist the truth when we're confronted with it, because the truth demands that we conform ourselves to the truth. And the truth is a person, the person of Jesus Christ. Our temptation is to try and make our own truth, to create our own truth, which is always an illusion, and sometimes a very destructive one that can really make us truly, utterly, spiritually blind. And this is the dynamic we see going on with the Pharisees. They're trying to avoid the truth at all costs. So they're trying to figure out how this man could possibly have been cured by this sinner, Jesus, who has cured him on the Sabbath as well. So Jesus wants us to truly see. He wants us to be like the blind man. He wants us to be people who have 20/20 spiritual vision. He wants us to in our lives, as we grow closer to him through the new covenant, the Mass, the Sunday Mass, through daily prayer, reading the Scriptures, listening and trying to live according to his teaching in the Scriptures and in the church. He wants us to truly see so that we too can speak the truth, that we can be liberated through his death and resurrection and speak the truth of Jesus Christ to our world, even though we know that there are strong elements in our world and in our society who will try to avoid the truth of Christ at all costs. So we need to be people who hear, that we need to be able to see, and then what we see and hear, we then do in our world that we're sent out to be in. So my brothers and sisters, I ask you again to please keep our catechumens in your prayers. Please also to keep the people of Ukraine and Russia in your prayers too, that sanity will rule, that spiritual sight will heal the blindness of those who are debilitated with hatred and mad ambitions that trample on the life, the rights and the happiness of other people. Help us, Lord, to be people who bring others, invite others to true sight. And so as we continue with our Lent and prepare for Easter, let us pray for that grace of sight, of hearing, of being ready to be sent, so that we too can die with Christ in order to rise with him this Easter. May God bless you.